All right, so what I'd like you today, we're gonna practice a little critical thinking exercise here. It's ungraded. I guess that's the good news. It's ungraded, not required, but I would really like you to give some thought to looking at the material here and analyzing the material and constructing a response in the discussion topic. Um, this is a topic that may have relevance for some of you, whether now or perhaps even in the future. Um, and it's an issue that tends to get overlooked a lot, and it still has modern relevance for us. So if you go to Unit 8, Reconstruction, and if you scroll down, you'll see the topic, Prison Labor, Fair Treatment on Modern Day Slavery. I'd like you to click on that, and it'll open up this page. So I've given you the text of the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Now, what we also need to remember is that except as a punishment for crime where the party shall have been duly convicted was added to the 13th Amendment and created a pretty big loophole here, because what it does is the federal government has in effect banned slavery. This was the ultimate end goal for Lincoln's administration at the end of the Civil War. But Congress includes this criminal punishment clause as a loophole to, you know, in one of those cases where sometimes a political decision was made, votes were needed to pass the amendment, and so this loophole was added. And what ends up happening during the Reconstruction era, even though slavery had already been banned, what we end up with is a scenario where many southern states, keep in mind the Confederate states, the former Confederate states, began a mass roundup of African American males, mass and leading to a wave of mass incarceration, imprisonment of African American males. So if you look at this picture, you'll see exactly what I mean here. This is an example. As you can see from the picture, this is a prison population made up entirely of African Americans. Not only that, but if you look even closer at the picture, many of them are really young. Okay, look closely. Some of these pictured could be as young as you right now, your age. And what we need to understand is that the southern states, obviously upset at the banning of slavery, basically criminalized minor offenses. So things like shoplifting, um, petty theft, um, loitering on a street corner, breaking curfew, things like those became jailable offenses. And so this becomes this becomes the net result with this mass wave of incarceration that begins in the 1860s that targeted African American males. Now we fast forward to 2024, and here's a recent picture of prison labor in the United States. And do you see any common pattern developing here? Okay, so there is a linkage here, right? Um, the United States today continues to be one of the highest. The United States, among the developed nations, the United States has the highest incarcerated population, more so than most of the other developed nations combined. Um, here's some other numbers to take into consideration that well, let's just say they kind of hit pretty hard. So this is the U.S. incarceration rates by race and gender. And if you look at these numbers, so white male ages 18 or older have a of the entire American population of white men ages 18 and up, 1 out of every 106 are incarcerated. Men ages 18 or older, in general, 1 in 54 are incarcerated. Now, look at the very bottom one. Like I said, this one kind of hits hard. Okay. Black men ages 20 to 34 are incarcerated at a rate of 1 out of every 9. That's over 10% of the black male population in America is incarcerated. Black males age 18 or older, the number still pretty high, 1 out of 15. So what we end up with, and this again, this goes back to Reconstruction, but in effect, what we've ended up with is a wave of incarceration that does target um, a specific group. And what ends up happening is we end up with something called recidivism, which basically means repeat offenders. Because what tends to end up happening is that young males, sometimes as young as 17, high school age, end up in juvenile detention for minor offenses. And because they're not treated properly in prison, because they're not given actual opportunities for rehabilitation, when they come out of prison, it's almost as if they're destined to just repeat the cycle and end up coming back to prison. So these numbers that you're looking at, many of them, and it's not just restricted to African Americans, but it's all races, that the recidivism rate is high. And this is part of why we have such a high incarceration rate in the United States. Okay. And so this is the issue that I wanted us to kind of look at and consider um, as we consider the topic. So another thing to consider too is, yes, the Fourth through the Seventh Amendments in the United States give us a lot of um, protections in terms of your rights when faced with criminal charges. But what we need to understand is that not a lot of people have those same opportunities to defend themselves um, that those with the resources who can afford to do so have. And so what ends up happening is a lot of lower income families, people who are lower income who get charged with minor crimes, shoplifting, for example, or minor drug offenses. And I'm going to come back to drug offenses here in a second. But people who end up charged with minor offenses simply cannot afford a good lawyer. And so they end up with a public defender, a court appointed lawyer, who most of the time has about 40 to 50 cases a week. And so because they're unable to get adequate representation, many of them plead out and end up with a prison sentence. And again, when you throw in all of the factors such as lower income, lack of counseling, and so on and so forth, there lack of services that they receive in prison, um, we create this cycle of incarceration, the recidivism that I've referred to previously. Um, Prison labor, as hinted at back in Reconstruction, continues to exist within the United States. Okay, it's important to recognize this, that we continue to practice um, prison labor, and there's a couple of different forms of prison labor. Going to another chart now. How much do incarcerated people earn in each state? So there are different types of jobs in prison labor in the United States. There are what we call regular jobs. These are jobs that take place on prison grounds, making license plates, cleaning around the prison property, highway trash pickup, cooking, running the laundry, cleaning officers' uniforms, et cetera, things like that. And then there are some jobs that are contracted out. It's not unusual for private companies to have labor agreements with prisons and the state to hire prisoners for certain jobs. Um, in fact, if you look at this source right here, what you'll learn is that the Department of Defense has even hired prisoners to help make missile systems. Okay. And so the prisoners, the incarcerated persons need jobs. Why do they need jobs? Because they have to earn money for their prison accounts. Why do they need prison accounts? Because they need to buy goods. What do they need to buy? Um, Food and hygiene items, snacks, the things that we tend to take for granted. Snacks, toothbrush, toothpaste, cigarettes, uh, hairbrushes, soap, shampoo, things like that. And they also need to pay for their own laundry and their own phone calls while they're in prison. None of this is actually provided for them. Okay. So, what type of wages do they get? And this is where I want us to think about a comparison with slavery. Okay. Because if you look at this link, there's a link right here where it says this chart. And if you click on that, it opens up this table for you. Now, these are not particularly recent statistics. It's from 2017, but it is a fairly up-to-date, um, within the last decade or so, rating of states and how much they pay inmates. And it'll show you all 50 states. Now, you're going to look at this list, and the first thing that should jump out at you is look at the low number. Now, let's go down to North Carolina. And hopefully you understand the premise here that in the state of North Carolina, inmates only make between 5 cents and 38 cents an hour. And so the system gets stacked against those who are incarcerated because 5 cents to 38 cents an hour. And you might say, well, they're a prisoner. You know, they should be glad that they have something to do and that they're actually getting paid for it. Perhaps, but also consider that if you need a toothbrush while you're in prison, it's not like you're going to pay what you pay if you go to get a toothbrush at Target or Walmart today. A tube of toothpaste, for example, you can get one, a cheap one for about $2, a good brand like Colgate or Crest or something like that, about $3. So somewhere between $2 to $3. But in prison, a tube of toothpaste can cost up to $5 or $6. And if you look at the numbers, doing the math, so let's take the high end here. If you're working a high-end prison job at 38 cents an hour, just to be able to afford to buy a tube of toothpaste, you're looking at having to put in 15 hours of work, of labor, prison labor, just to be able to buy that tube of toothpaste. And so this is what inmates are facing. Phone calls are an even bigger issue. There's another link to look at here. Long distance phone calls, there's a link. And when you click on that, you'll look at the cost. Let me magnify that a little bit. And again, we'll go down to North Carolina. But we'll go down to the state of North Carolina. So it costs about 20 cents a minute to make a phone call in North Carolina, long distance. Cell phones are not allowed. So a 15-minute phone call can cost up to $3. Now, again, do the math. Okay. 15-minute phone call costs $3. If you're making about 38 cents an hour, you're looking at about 7.5 to 8 hours of labor just to be able to make a 15-minute phone call. So with that in mind, and as you read through this article right here, this portion of an article contains an interview with a woman whose husband is in prison. And so there's a bit more information, firsthand information here. This is from North Carolina, because it talks about Central Prison in Raleigh, and it talks about some of the cost of things and how it affects them. And again, keep in mind that these are low income families. So it's not as if they can call on family members and say, hey, can you put $20 in my account? Can you put $30 in my account? It's not quite that simple. So there are strong arguments to be made on either side. One side says they're prisoners, they don't deserve fair and equal treatment. They were found guilty after a constitutional process. You know what that process is. You get arrested, you get charged, you get a lawyer, you go on trial, and if you're guilty, you're sentenced. Um, but on what we need to understand is on paper, that constitutional process is fair and equal to everybody. But in practice, has it been fair and equal? That's the important thing to consider. Okay. So they are still American citizens. Um, so the other side of the argument says they are still citizens, they should be treated fairly because the Constitution is what ensures it. This type of labor is nothing more than modern day slavery. So, what I'd like you to do um, for this discussion topic is to take into account all of the information that's presented. Read through the sources, um, but I want you to formulate a response. What do you think? Use your understanding of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, okay? And the Bill of Rights, form a basis for your response. Um, what I'm looking for is some critical thinking in your responses, okay? And not just to share your responses. Oh, Mr. Tang, I don't think this is fair. And then you hit post. Well, tell me more. Tell us more because your classmates are going to read this. This is a discussion topic. Um, One thing you're going to learn as you get older and you move into high school and you start taking writing classes or you take AP courses, those of you who are interested in doing things like that, you're going to move more into the area of critical thinking. And it's important to understand that the basis for your opinion, the why or the how you came up with your opinion, can be just as important as your actual opinion. Okay. You're all free to hold an opinion, absolutely. Some of you are going to argue that prisoners should be happy to be where they're at and that they don't have harsher sentences to face. I can certainly understand that line of argument. Make your case for it. What is the basis for that opinion? Likewise, you might take the flip side. Okay. This is unfair treatment. It's unconstitutional. We should be doing more to provide, or we should be ensuring that prisoners have a fair shot. So the basis for your opinion. Why and how did you come up with that? So feel free to respond to each other and please keep your responses on topic. As you post, you're going to be able to see each other's responses. So I really do look forward to reading what you have to say. Some of you have given me some good, solid written responses on different assignments. I think this exercise will be a good way for you to stretch your thinking as well.